Welcome back to Case of Interest Kohberger. I'm Newswatch 16 Stacey Lang. This is our web series where we break down all of the latest developments in the University of Idaho murder case. Of course, that happened in November of last year. 4 students were killed in their off-campus apartment at the University of Idaho. About a month later, we learned the suspect in that case is Bryan Kohberger, who's a native of our area, Monroe County, the Albrightsville area. So we're piecing this all together as this is now a local story to northeastern and central Pennsylvania. So this is our chance to sift through the paperwork that's filed in court leading up to Kohberger's trial, which is right now scheduled for October. And there's been a fairly important development this past week. There's a statute in Idaho criminal law that says that a defendant in a trial can present a formal alibi. And basically presenting the formal alibi ahead of trial keeps the door open for that alibi to be discussed in trial. And that is a decision that Kohberger's defense team has made. And they submitted paperwork with an alibi. But there are some caveats to that. We brought in an expert who's going to help explain what this really means. I want to turn now to the paperwork that was filed on Wednesday in Idaho court with Kohberger's alibi and explain to you what Kohberger is presenting here. He basically is saying that he was alone in his car, as the evidence points that he was in his car driving his white Hyundai Elantra around the time of the murders in the area of Kings Road where those 4 students were killed, but he never left his car. That's his alibi. Let me read these 3 paragraphs here that kind of are the crux of this paperwork. Mr. Kohberger has had a habit of going for drives alone. Often he would go for drives at night. He did so late on November 12th and into November 13th of 2022. Mr. Kohberger is not claiming to be at a specific location at a specific time. At this time, there is not a specific witness to say precisely where Mr. Kohberger was at each moment of the hours between late night November 12th, 2022 and early morning November 13th, 2022. He was out driving during the late night and early morning hours of November 12th and 13th of 2022. Counsel for Mr. Kohberger is aware that case law broadens the definition of alibi with the statutory requirement of a specific location to more broadly include disclosure of information that tends to state the person claiming alibi was at a place other than the location of an offense. Mr. Kohberger has complied to the extent possible at this time. So basically they're saying here that though an alibi should be a specific place and time, they don't have that. But this is the minimum that they have to present to keep this alibi discussion open in court. Corroboration of Bryan Kohberger not being at 1122 King Road may be brought out through cross-examination of the state's witnesses. At this time, Mr. Kohberger cannot be more specific about the possible witnesses and exactly what they will say. The defense has been hampered by the state's own choices. The state chose a secret grand jury rather than the planned preliminary hearing. Had the state moved forward with a preliminary hearing, the defense would have had the opportunity to develop testimony through cross-examination and witness presentation. So they're also using this document to make an argument they have been making for weeks now, that the prosecution should not have indicted Kohberger through a secret grand jury and that they should have had an opportunity for preliminary hearing. Because what they want to do is see which witnesses the prosecution is going to bring to the stand, have an opportunity to cross-examine them ahead of trial. Now, we're going to break all of this down with a Luzerne County prosecutor, Jarrett Ferrantino, who's been involved in some big murder trials here in northeastern Pennsylvania. He has an interesting take on why Kohberger and his team may have made this decision. Let's listen to what he has to say.
When you look at this document where Kohberger lays out what he says his alibi is, what's your reaction as a prosecutor?
It's a defining moment when a defendant commits to particular aspects of their defense. Here, Bryan Kohberger, think about what he's saying in his alibi defense. He's saying, I was not at Kings Road in the middle of the night and those early morning hours. I was out driving around by myself. Now, that is his alibi. He's not saying I was at a library studying with other witnesses who can testify and support that position. He's not saying I was with family He's not even saying I was in bed in my apartment, which is where we typically are in the early morning hours of November 12th, November 13th. He has committed to being out and about, in all likelihood in that white Hyundai Elantra, which is consistent. So as a prosecutor, I'm looking at what aspects of what Mr. Kohberger has committed to is consistent with my case. Here it is. He was up. He was out. He was alone. He was in that Hyundai Elantra. All of a sudden, these are the kind of things that as a prosecutor, when you can show that Elantra was in proximity of Kings Road, his cell phone supports that information. Nobody else was with Bryan Kohberger at that time. His alibi is hurting him when tested against the prosecution's evidence. Even the manner in which they've presented it. In Idaho, if you put forth an alibi, which is fairly typical, you are required to specifically state where you were and identify witnesses that can support your case. Their filing, which we've reviewed here, says, well, we don't have witnesses that could necessarily put him there. We're going to procure that information in cross-examination with the state's witnesses. And we can't specifically say where he was. He was just driving around in the middle of the night. You've painted yourself into quite a corner there. It's a curious alibi. I don't know that that's the kind of alibi that's going to ultimately carry the day. Now, I haven't been privy to, and nor has the public, what else the defense is looking to put on, but they've committed that Bryan Kohberger in the middle of the night was on the move, and that's big.
And it does say that it seems like the case law supports that if he says this now, then it opens the door for him to be able to present witnesses at time of trial, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
So Kohberger will always have the opportunity to present whatever witnesses have relevant information. So to the extent that his alibi opens the door for him to present witnesses, it does. But in Idaho, you're required to identify those alibi witnesses at the filing. They haven't done that. They've simply said the witnesses we're going to utilize in support of this alibi will actually be the state's witnesses and the information we're going to glean through cross-examination. That's a pretty curious approach, considering the prosecution maintains they have witnesses that are going to put Bryan Kohberger and his car and his DNA and his phone at Kings Road.
Do you anticipate that they're doing that because the defense feels like they're not going to be able to refute that evidence, which is the surveillance video of the car, the cell phone data, and all of that?
Well, if they couldn't refute it, if they're going to be unable to refute that evidence, their client is in a lot of trouble because the evidence puts him at Kings Road. Why the defense may be putting forth this alibi, let's say this, the defense may be putting forth this alibi because Bryan Kohberger is asking them to. But again, it is an ambiguous alibi at best. And to me, it is stronger in support of the prosecution's theory of this case rather than supportive of the defense.
It seems like Ann Taylor, the defense attorney, is also using this document as an opportunity to again ask for a preliminary hearing, which Kohberger did not get because he was indicted by a grand jury. Do you think that, why do you think that they are so adamant about having that hearing, and do you think they'll get it?
Well, let's focus on what they're hoping to get an opportunity to cross-examine the prosecution's witness before the time. Let's say this. What I can glean from the strategy of the defense to date, they are hoping for a day and an opportunity to cross-examine the defense's witnesses before they get to a jury. So they're hoping to re-engage that preliminary process, re-engage those witnesses through pretrial filings. Strategically, that's a pretty smart thing to do. See how these witnesses testify, test their recollection of facts, test their expertise. And they keep trying to relitigate ultimately the grand jury proceeding. I think it's important to note, if that proceeding was flawed, and I'm not suggesting it was, you just get a do-over. They go back and represent it. Ultimately, Bryan Kohberger doesn't walk out of his jail cell. We end up right where we were. So at the end of the day, that particular strategy ultimately ends up being like a delay tactic and tolls the inevitable day where these witnesses are going to be put in front of a jury, and Bryan Kohberger is going to stand trial for the horrible, horrific deaths of these young people.
That was Jarrett Ferrantino, a Luzerne County prosecutor, talking about what may help or hinder Kohberger's case in presenting this alibi to the judge, as he has this week. We're also looking forward to a hearing. Kohberger is expected in court on August 18th. That's when the prosecution and the defense and the judge will all hash out a series of motions that were presented by Kohberger's defense team. One of those is a fairly important one and ties back to that alibi discussion. It's a motion to dismiss the grand jury indictment to give the prosecution an opportunity to have a preliminary hearing and go through some of the prosecution's evidence. We'll have to see whether or not the judge allows that, but we'll be paying attention to that. That's scheduled for August 18th at 10:30 Idaho time. So it'll be in the afternoon here. We'll have coverage on Newswatch 16 and on WNEP.com. And of course, we'll break it all down here on Case of Interest Kohberger.